Is there greater isolation in the Australian desert, or being unable to fit in with society? Welcome, my Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. My name is Kyron, host of the Mere Mortals podcast, but also this one where I dive deeper into the books that I'm reading to get out the juicy information, to provide you with some reviews, to look at some interesting themes that are contained within these books. And I do have a fun one for you today. It is called Voss by Patrick White. So this was published in 1957, and it's about 450 pages in length, so it took me about 10 hours to really get through. It's a story of adventure into the Australian wilderness, although it's not a particularly, doesn't have a nice ending per se. It's set in 1845, so this was when Australia was kind of being formed or colonized, I guess you'd call it. And there's two principal characters. One is Johann Ulrich Voss, and the other is Laura Trevelyan. And so this is a fictional story, but it does have some loose baseness on reality, which I'll talk about soon. We start off in the New South Wales colony of New South Wales. And this is where the two principal characters meet, and then Voss goes off on his adventure to basically try and travel across Australia. So he goes with a crew, a band, a party of people, and we sort of switch between the two stories of him and then of Laura back in New South Wales. So it's a tale of two things. There's two characters, there's two kind of separate places that they're really being looked at, the inland Australia and then her home in New South Wales. And then also there's roughly two time periods. So we focus on the time period where they know each other and his kind of expedition going. And then there's a reflection afterwards of after everything's kind of been said and done 20 years later and people have grown up. So I guess it's an exploration of maturity of her and of Voss, and there's very complex weavings of tension, of passion, of love, of religion. There's a whole lot contained, I guess, within this book. I'll touch upon the author, and he was an Aussie author, Patrick White, but he was British born, so I'm not sure how much we can particularly claim him as Aussie, although he did come here when he was 6 months old, so yeah, I'd say he's pretty Aussie. And he was a Nobel Prize winner, and I believe he's the only Nobel Prize winner for literature that Australia has ever produced, so this book was kind of contained within that package, so it's definitely one that is, I suppose, intriguing and has been recognized as award-worthy. And as I mentioned, it's loosely based upon an actual person called Ludwig Leichhardt. So a very German name, and it was indeed a German who traveled through Australia, and Voss in the book is German as well. All the other characters, I'm unclear of if there was a girl called Laura or if he had a love interest of many of the associated people in this party. I don't know. I don't get the feeling it was. I think it was based primarily on just this one guy who did indeed travel inland Australia in this time period of 1845, mid-1800s. So let's go on to the themes themselves. And the first one that really came out for me was doom. Why do some people seek self-destruction? Voss is a very complex character, and we see this right from the get-go, and he's kind of set apart from many other people. And there's no real categorical reason for why he decides to go on this trip. Sort of in the interest of science, sort of for, I guess, maybe the fame or the exploration or the adventure aspect, but it's not, none of them are really strong motives. And as we start to read further into the book, we get hints at kind of what he's looking for. So I'm going to jump to the middle now. This is page 258, and this is a section where I guess it talks about kind of what he is actually looking for. So then Voss, who had been watching his companion's blurry face, knew that Palfreyman could never rescue him, as he had almost hoped during the story of the Hunchback Sister. Although the brother would be saved by the strength of his delusion, the Hunchback Sister, together with himself, were reserved, the Germans suspected, for the Gothic splendours. So the moon rose in the thicket of the Brigalow and was glittering in the eyes of the condemned. So we kind of know as this goes on, we saw more passages like this where it's kind of hinting that he knows he's going to his own demise. He is really looking forward to there's no real intention of him surviving per se. It's not like, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to make sure that all my team members and the people in my party who I'm responsible for because I'm the leader, how are we going to get through to the other side of this journey? And when will I know when to call it quits and head back home? There's never really any indication that that is what is going through his mind. So there's kind of two theories here for this. And what I would say is there's a definite kind of self-destruction aspect to this. He knows he's going to his own demise. And it's like, well, why? Why would you want to do this? And so my first theory is damnation. So doom, funnily enough, I believe is actually derived from damnation. And this is kind of divine punishment for a transgression, I guess. So this is where you could say he had no choice, like he was being compelled onwards by God somewhat to seek his own destruction for a transgression. And so we see here on page 44 just a small little hint of, I guess, why he might have transgressed. And so this is someone who's talking to him, and he says, "Mr. Voss," he said, with no suggestion of criticism, "you have a contempt for God because he is not in your own image." Dang. So Voss was indeed a very arrogant man. He was very self-assured. He was very kind of contemptible of other people, and he did view himself on this higher plane of level of reality of godliness. And maybe he believed himself too godly was the problem. And so this was an impetus on his part. If he thought he was a god, he could maybe get away with anything, or maybe he needed to, and maybe there was an outside force pushing him or something like that. And we see that other characters recognize this as well. So once again, they're quite deep into their journey, and he's, I guess, trying to understand himself in many ways. There is a lot of introspection on his part. And there was a particular character called Frank Le Mesurier, which I believe is like Frank the Measurer. So if you kind of translate that from the French. And he was a character who kind of knew Voss more than himself. And he could kind of express this in a way which Voss wouldn't particularly be able to. And I'll talk about more of that soon. And he basically was writing in this journal, and all these other characters knew, okay, like something of deep truth is contained within here. And we find out that there's kind of 4 passages which are spread across 2 pages. And I might just pick out some select quotes from these. So he starts with, "Man is king. They hung a robe upon him of blue sky. His crown was molten. He rode across his kingdom of dust, which paid homage to him for a season, with jasmine and lilies and visions of water." So he's talking about kind of Voss here. This is an allegory for Voss. As we go on, then he says, "Until the sun delivered me from my body, the wind fretted my wretched ribs, my skull was split open by the green lightning. Now that I am nothing, I am love, and love is the simplest of all tongues." And then the final part, "Then I am not God, but man. I am a god with a spear in his side. So they take me when the fires are lit and the smell of smoke and ash rises above the smell of dust. The spears of failure are eating my liver as the ant-men wait to perform their little rites. O God, my God, if suffering is measured on the soul, then I am damned forever." And it continues on in this way. And basically what you read from this passage is pretty similar to what actually happens to the characters in the end, which, spoiler alert here, as the party continues on, there's kind of a separation. Voss and 2 companions go one way. Judd, who is another kind of principal character, and 2 others go the other way. And Voss ends up being kind of Voss and his party gets captured by some Aborigines. So actually there was Voss, 2 companions, and the Aboriginal guide, Jackie, who goes with them. And the Aboriginals basically sacrifice them and kill them. And I believe this was actually related to Halley's Comet as well. There's a kind of section of it talking about this great snake in the sky, which I think was Halley's Comet, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And yeah, we can kind of see like, dang, if there's a lot of allegories to him being God, and then this punishment coming upon him for transcending from being a man into a god. And you could maybe look at the allegory of or the example of Christ, this God born into a human body, and then is ended up being sacrificed for this saving the sins or something like that of humanity. My Christianity is not red, smoking hot. So there's one kind of thing which is, I guess this is more like the Christian side of it, the divine punishment, looking at the God side of it. So there's like a religious aspect to it. The other one, which is one I'm more drawn to, is more, I guess it's like a challenge to himself. And it's almost like he wants to be more than his frail body. And we can kind of see how he tries to transcend this in a way. So if we can look at some real life examples, so someone like David Goggins, for example, or a lady I've had on the podcast, on the Mere Mortals podcast before, Tanya Hall. And there's these people who do these extreme things like ultra marathons, or Juan, my co-host on that podcast, also likes to talk about Ross Edgley, and he's done things like swim around Great Britain until his tongue was falling to pieces, and his hands were just bloated all the time from being in water, 16 hours a day sort of thing. And there is this kind of aspect of self-destruction that some people want to try and transcend something about themselves, and usually it's kind of like transcending their body in a way. So it's almost like putting their body through such extreme things to see what their mind and soul can withstand, endure. And I would say Voss is kind of similar to this. Whenever he's being described in the book, it's not as a kind of strapping young man. It's usually as like a stick figure thin, wiry guy who but has an inner fire within him, sort of thing. And we kind of see he does achieve this in a way. So right towards the end of the book and the very last page of the book, we have someone who is talking to Laura and asking about Voss, and he says, "That reminds me, I didn't intended asking you about this. What shall we call him? This familiar spirit whose name is upon everybody's lips, the German fellow who died." "Voss did not die," Miss Trevelyan replied. "He is there still, it is said, in the country, and always will be. His legend will be written down eventually by those who have been troubled by it. And come, if we are not certain of the facts, how is it possible to give the answers? The air will tell us," Miss Trevelyan said, by which she had grown hoarse and fell to wondering aloud whether she had brought her lozenges. Such a random last sentence. So we can indeed see that he kind of has transcended his body in many ways, and he has this gruesome end where his head is he's basically dying of thirst, of starvation, of weariness, and is kind of just lying on this ground in this tent as the Aborigines are revering him / cursing him for his kind of mysticism in a way. And Jackie, his guide at the end, the one who he kind of reveres the most amongst his companions, ends up coming in and cuts off his head and throws it into the fire, and kind of there's jubilation amongst the Aborigines. And yeah, it's a pretty messed up end, and yet Voss isn't like woe is me really at any point of this. He's kind of continually being like, dang, I need to push harder, I need to examine my spirit more. I'm contemptible of all these human weaknesses amongst my companions and amongst myself, this sort of thing. So I think there is this aspect of self-destruction which some people find that they need to, and self-destruction, I'm talking more of the body here rather than the spirit, because I guess you'd argue that in many ways his spirit succeeded and he was able to live forever, and maybe he is immortal in some sort of way, which is maybe what he was seeking. And you can see this with other people who want to explore space, or I guess this explorer aspect of being the first to find out new things, even though there is a significant bodily risk to themselves. And you can see this in books like Nathaniel's Nutmeg, which is talking about the spice trade and how people from England and Holland would travel to the East Indies. So this is kind of the area of fever and of getting tropical diseases and and all that sorts of thing. And yet they would continually send boat after boat. Let's keep going. So there is maybe an aspect of that into explorers who there is maybe a sort of wanting to transcend beyond their own body. It's something to think about. The second theme that I wanted to get onto was communication and the imperfection of language. So this is where we'll talk a little bit more about Laura, the other principal character. But Laura and Voss both seem to have this difference, I guess, compared to other people in the book. And they don't fit in. And we see this from the very start as well. Laura's described as an intellectual, like she's a woman who reads books. How ridiculous, and this is, compared to the times, she's set apart from the very, very, very get-go. And we can see this in page 102 when she's talking to Mr. Palfreyman, and they're just about to go, the Mr. Palfreyman and Voss are just about to set off on the kind of first leg, the boat trip from New South Wales. And she's talking with him, and he says, I'm most grateful to you. She says, I'm most grateful to you, she said, for our conversation. I shall remember it. Has it told you anything? He asked lightly. It was easy now that he was going. Not, she said, not in words. Now she was become too wooden to struggle any further in the effort to express herself. She seemed altogether humble and contrite, small, even hunched, she who had been proud on her powerful horse. This is pretty common. Everyone who interacts with Laura is even though she can be charming and witty and knows how to hold a conversation, they come away with this kind of she's weird sort of aspect. She doesn't fit in. I don't understand her. And this is also similar for Voss. However, he has an easy escape with his German, and he can say, my German, like I can't express myself as well as I can in German, which I think is actually a little bit bullshit. I think if he was an Australian guy and he wasn't German, I think he would just not have this easy out that he does, which he uses a kind of an excuse, and he brings up several times. But it's not the real thing. The real thing is he can't express himself in words, nor can Laura. They both have this inability to really express what is within and communicate as clearly as perhaps other people can, like her sister, her cousin Belle, and several of the other characters who mostly fit in with society in general. Although you could say that the band that Voss kind of accumulates for his trip, they're all kind of a little bit misfit, but not as to the extent that I would say him and Laura are. Now, we can see that there's kind of some different sections where these two find themselves, and then it's like, oh my god, I've found oh mein Gott in the German, where they've found someone who they can express themselves with. It's almost like they know each other's soul in a way. So there's several aspects to this. The first is when they have this initial meeting in a room, and Laura is kind of unimpressed with him, and it's just like, dang, this German guy is arrogant beyond belief. Yet they still form a kind of a connection then. And then subsequently at another party, a garden party where they maybe get, who knows how long it is in the book, it only goes for a couple of pages of conversation, but let's just assume it was an hour or two, that they form this much, much deeper connection. And it's kind of nonsensical but meaningful. And I won't read out any passages, but they're talking about these lofty, elevated ideas. It's not direct. It's not particularly understandable for an outsider observing in, like I was, but you still feel that they're communicating somehow, that they are getting meaning across to each other, and they know what they're talking about, and so they're touching upon aspects of atheism and of prayer and of self-destruction, and they're hinting at things that are to come as well. And they seem to know each other. Laura knows him, and he knows Laura more than anyone has been able to know each of the other beforehand. Now, then they kind of split apart, and they're separated, and Voss goes on his journey, and so they somewhat communicate with some messages, written messages, letters, and this is where a proposal is made. He proposes to her to be his wife, and so she is now kind of engaged to him, even though she doesn't tell anyone about it, and he doesn't tell anyone about it. And yet they form this even deeper connection, and this is when they start having visions of each other. So, when she goes through this fever, a brain fever of some sort, it's unclear. Voss appears to her in visions, and much the same when Voss is going through these terrible periods of dehydration, of starvation, of fatigue, of even in his dreams, Laura appears, and they kind of communicate with each other via that way as well. So there's this, they're communicating in I suppose what you would not call the normal way, in visions to each other. And then finally, once he's kind of passed away, or it's assumed he's passed away, it's the bones of his body are never found by other people outside of the Jackie who was the one who killed him and who doesn't confess to this killing at all. She her problems and she recovers from her brain fever at the same time that Voss is kind of dying. The problem remains for her of this kind of inability to communicate, and it's unfortunate, and she's judged for this supremely harshly. So right at the end of the book as well, in page 432, we see her arrive to this party, her cousin's party, and this is kind of 20 years later now. So she's a mistress at a school. She's looking after people, after little kids, and she arrives late at this party, and everyone is kind of looking at her and going like, who is this person? Like, well, they know of her, but they don't know her. And so I shall sit here, said Laura, and no one else would have dared. So evident was it that the stern chair belonged to its absent owners. Now you can see, people were saying, is she not a crow? A scarecrow, rather. Do not bring me anyone, Laura Trevelyan enjoined. I would not care to be an inconvenience, and I have never succeeded in learning the language. I shall sit and watch them wearing their dresses. So she kind of takes this approach where it's, I don't even want to attempt really to fit in. I know who I am. I'm an outcast somewhat, and the judgment continues, and you can see people judging her for her dress, for the way she behaves, for her occupation. The list goes on, and I wonder if all of this comes down to a means of expression, and would she have these problems, and would people be judging her so harshly, and would she have needed Voss in a way if she had found other means of expression? And so in a different time, could she have had an outlet? So one of the things that we really see is, man, it was rather oppressive for women, and somewhat to men as well, the customs and fashions of that time. So we can see that her liking to read books is considered unladylike. Women are not allowed to read nor write poetry per se, and if they do, you're kind of exposing yourself as an outcast. And some of the kids at the end of her school were writing poetry, and it was like, oh, how improper, dearest me. There's these restrictions of manners, and there's, I guess you have to kind of follow within the bounds of propriety and being of being proper and prim and whatnot. The dancing, their dance structures are very strict, and there's no expressive dance. You're not allowed to dance on your own, sort of thing. It's a partner dance. There's just seems to be no real way for someone like her where maybe they would be able to express themselves in an artistic pursuit of some sort. Or, nowadays with technology and video and audio and, all the different ways that people can express themselves, there seemed to be such a lacking of it back then that I wonder if she had a different means or method to it, would the, I suppose, social outcast nature that she was in, would it have remained? Most likely so, but maybe it wouldn't have been so... I suppose harsh on her, because there was a lot of introspection on her part of I would say negative introspection. She didn't really seem to be enjoying herself for a lot of the time, and in fact most of the characters in the book didn't seem to really be enjoying themselves at any particular moment, apart from kind of the ignorant Belle, who was kind of blissfully unaware of the world and was the happiest of them all. So, dang. Those two big things there. Let's jump on to my own observations and takeaways. There's lots of small interactions within this book that I really feel deserve more investigation. And we can see with Palfreyman and his sister, this is the Hunchback, which I kind of hinted at in one of the quotes that I was reading. There's the Turner and Ralph. So these are two of the people on the journey as well, and they have this discussion related to Frank and his kind of, I suppose, being the dooms bringer in a way because of this journal, which is it's kind of like he's foretelling what is going to happen in the future, and they're kind of expressing, I guess, their worry that he is kind of bringing it into reality. We can look at Judd and his kind of passive independence, his ability. He's so kind of calmed and controlled, and he is the kind of reason there's a splitting up of the party after Palfreyman's death, and then Palfreyman, he's the kind of joiner between the two. There's just so many other characters, and it's like, dang, there's I haven't spoken enough about them, and there's a reason for that. That's because there's so much else going on in the book. There's a lot of religious symbolism as well. So I kind of hinted at this with the damnation and the God aspect, the divine punishment. But it really does go beyond kind of my pay grade, because I'm not that deep into the Christian religion and symbolism. And we see this with Mercy. So this is the kind of bastard daughter of one of the servants called Rose, who ends up taking her own life, and who Laura somewhat adopts. And there's their initial meeting in the garden. This is kind of comparable to the Garden of Eden, perhaps. There's the going out into the desert. This is the kind of tribulation out into the desert. There's so much. There is a lot contained within it, and most of it, I would say, probably went over my head just because I'm not primed for it. I'm not particularly looking for it. So if you enjoy that sort of religious symbolism, you might really enjoy what this book has to offer, particularly of the Christian variety. And the last kind of observation is a lot of it is a word salad. There is a lot of conversations within here, and I hope you got a taste of it from the quotes that I was reading out, where if you analyzed it word by word, it doesn't particularly make sense. It's not easy to decipher what's really being said. It's not told in a straight up direct manner. It's hidden behind veils of meaning and could be interpreted in many ways, and some of the characters seem to know what they're talking about, i.e. when Laura and Voss meet. But then if Laura is talking to a quote unquote normal person, then there's the meaning doesn't carry across, and so they're left confused or angry or unsure or scared of her and of Voss in many ways. So there is a lot of this word salad, but it kind of makes sense as well. And this is the unexplainable part to me, because normally I'm not a fan of this type of hiding meaning behind words and being vague. It definitely, it was done with a purpose and an intent of writing it this way, but I don't think it was done just for the aspect of making it difficult to understand. I think there was kind of a deeper purpose behind this. And this is why I would kind of agree that, yeah, you know what, this book was worthy of maybe a Nobel Prize or something, because it is such a different style of writing that I've encountered before, and yet it captured me. It didn't drive me away, which normally this sort of thing does. And so this makes me think, oh, okay, maybe there's something contained within here that I'm missing, or he's found a way to express himself to me, perhaps, which normally in a way I would dismiss as being like, oh, that's just poor writing, or that they're doing it just for the sake of doing it. Whereas I feel like, yeah, you know what, maybe this is Patrick White trying to convey something that couldn't be conveyed in a normal kind of plain, easily understandable everyday language. So I did like that. I did like that aspect. So in summary, it's much like the central character Voss. The book itself is somewhat difficult to understand. It's very enigmatic, and it's not straightforward. So I feel like you could pick it apart in many ways, and I almost feel like I've done a disservice in this review to all of the other characters that are contained within, to maybe some of the deeper meanings. There's a lot going on. There's really a lot going on in this book, and they're all kind of unique aspects that you could take out and examine a little bit more deeply. So I see why this is an Aussie classic. I see why he's kind of gotten the only Australian to be awarded on this such higher level. And, awards are just, some of these things can be gamed and whatnot. But no, I think this book is distinct enough that it is worthy of being called distinct. So I'm giving Voss by Patrick White a 7.5 out of 10. My only real detraction is that I think it might require kind of another read to get through to be able to really understand it. I wouldn't say that I gained lots and lots of pleasure in the actual reading of the book, but I did afterwards in kind of my own examination and looking at things a little bit more deeply. So yeah, it's a distinct book. And so if you're looking for something perhaps that you've never read before, perhaps that's related to Australians or very individual, I would say this is maybe a good book to pick up for you. And that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me to this part of the video. Have you read any of Patrick White's works before? Have you read Voss? What do you think of this aspect of, I guess you'd call it self-destruction and looking for it, of communication as well? If any of these things really intrigue you, I'd love to hear from you. So leaving a comment and whatnot is on the channel, and liking, subscribing, that sort of stuff is great as well. And I'd also recommend that you check out the Mere Mortals podcast. This is where I touch upon these sort of themes in a bit more deeply, in a more conversational style with my co-host Juan. And themes from this book and other books do arise. So if you enjoy my deconstruction and you perhaps want to know more on my just general life thoughts and things like that, I suggest coming over and checking out the Mere Mortals podcast, available on YouTube and then also on all of the audio platforms. I do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and you're not seeking out some destruction, and you're able to communicate correctly and properly with the world. That would be great. And other than that, I'm heading out. Kyron, out.